Hi there, my name is Jeneva Rose, and I'm the New York Times bestselling author of 9 novels. My work has been translated into 29 languages and has sold millions of copies worldwide. But the number I'm most proud of is the number 468, because 468 is the number of rejections I received on my path to being published and my career as an author. The reason I'm most proud of that number is because it represents my drive, my determination, my patience, and my overall tenacity. Now, before I can talk to you about the challenges of being a bestseller, I have to talk to you about the challenges of becoming a published author, because it wasn't easy. So, my first rejection I ever received wasn't a part of that 468. It was actually myself. I told myself I could not complete a book. I was the first person to stand in my way, as many of us are. But in 2016, I decided that I was going to write a book. I was going to write only one book, and it was going to be for me. It was a bucket list item, one I wanted to just check off, prove that I could do it. And so in 2016, I sat down and I started writing that book. And it was more than just a bucket list item. It was a way for me to work through grief. My mother had unexpectedly passed away my freshman year of college. And this book was going to help me heal, to work through that grief. And halfway through it, I knew I would finish it. I had tried multiple times before, never making it past page 80. But with this book, I knew I would, because it meant more, and it was for me. By the time I finished that book, I knew I would write another. I had fallen in love with storytelling again. I had fallen in love with the process. I loved having something tangible to show others. I loved working for myself outside of my full-time corporate job. I enjoyed my nights and weekends at my computer, and I wanted to continue that. And then I told myself, maybe this could be something more. Maybe I could be published. At the time, it seemed like a pipe dream, but I gave myself permission to at least try. And so I started querying that first book. And if you don't know what querying is, it's when you send a letter to an agent, and you're like, this is me, this is my work, and this is why you should want to represent me. But before I sent that first query, I told myself I would be rejected. It was inevitable. It's a creative career. Art is subjective. We don't all like the same things. We don't all dislike the same things, which is great. Because if we did, we would live in a very boring world. So that first rejections, they started rolling in. People said, no, this wasn't the book. You didn't have the voice. But I kept writing. And I told myself every rejection I received, every no, I would treat as a noble attempt or a not right now. So I wrote through the rejections. I wrote through the waiting. And finally, after completing another book, an agent said yes. And I thought my whole world was going to change. I was going to be a bestseller. She was going to sell that book. It was going to be a massive advance. I'd be traveling the world. That wasn't the case. Not at all. She submitted to publishers, and then they said no. And I was like, I thought I only needed one yes. You don't. You need a few more. And then after 18 months, I wrote through that waiting time. I wrote through those rejections that were pouring in now from the publishing side, not just the agency side. After 18 months, I decided to part ways with her. And I started querying another book, one that I had written when I was represented by her. Once again, the rejections kept pouring in. But I couldn't let go of that book that she had signed me with. Publishing had said no to it. So I had a couple of options. I could self-publish it, or I could submit it to small publishers that accepted unagented submissions. I went with the latter. I was like, okay, it's going to be a risk. They don't have the marketing budget, even if one said yes to me. I have to market this book. Because then if I want to get another publishing deal, they start looking at your sales history. Whereas before, it's a clean slate. So I started submitting, and a small digital-first publisher out of the UK said, yeah, we'll publish your book. No advance, there's not gonna be any marketing, but we'll put it up on Amazon for you. And digital first meant it was never going to be in bookstores. But I was working in social media. I was good at social media. I was good at connecting to people through the screen. And so I said, I can market this book. I can do this. And then it was my path to becoming a bestseller, although I did not know I was on that path. My book published in July of 2020, and we all know what the world looked like at that time. We were in the midst of a pandemic. The world had gone digital. We were living behind screens, consuming our content from screens. And I started looking at opportunities to connect with readers, digitally, of course. I took to Instagram and Facebook first. I engaged. I started fostering a community. I posted mostly static images and photos since video was not a big thing at that time. But then I saw a little app called TikTok. And I was told it was lowbrow, specifically from publishing. I was told it was also an app for teens dancing. So I downloaded it. I was like, is that really what this is? I had finished watching Tiger King, and I didn't have a lot to do. So I started scrolling through that app. And what I found was there were people craving community and connection. They were sharing their likes and their dislikes. They were making recommendations for film, books, TV shows. I learned a lot from that app. Hacks, DIY, tips, tricks. And I was like, I think there's an opportunity here. There's an audience here. It'll be a challenge because it's saturated. Everyone wants your attention. But I started posting videos. And in January of 2021, I had an idea for a video. I knew I needed to hook a reader within those first 3 seconds, otherwise they're scrolling by. And maybe they weren't even a reader, but they could become one. So I came up with an idea that ended up becoming a trend on Book Talk. And it was where I told the story of the protagonist as if it was my own. And for that one, it was The Perfect Marriage. A top criminal defense attorney faces her most challenging case when she vows to defend her husband, a man accused of murdering his mistress. Juicy. And at the end of that 30-second video, I showed the book. And I was like, yep, that's actually the plot of my novel. So if you want to learn more, you're gonna have to close out this app and you're gonna have to buy this book. I wasn't sure it would work. It takes a lot to get people to close out the TikTok app, that call to action, to get them to do something else. But in 3 days, that video had 4.5 million views. I had sold 15,000 copies in those 3 days, more than I had sold in the first few months. And I thought they would be mad at me for tricking them, but they weren't. They were like, this is how books should be advertised. Don't give me a 2-paragraph synopsis, tell me the hook. So I was like, okay, but I wanted to do more from there. I had started growing that readership, but I wanted to talk to them, to connect with them. So I opened it up. I said, hey, if you choose my book for your book club, I'll drop in virtually. I did not realize how many people would say yes to that, and I dropped in on 100 book clubs in a year. 1/3 of my nights that year was me spent sitting in front of my computer screen, chatting with readers all around the world, hearing what this book meant to them. And to this day, I still get comments from readers that that book was the first book they'd ever picked up outside of a classroom. That book turned them into a reader. That book made them fall back in love with reading. I was also one of those people that had fallen out of love with reading during college when they made me read some books I didn't want to read. And so I knew that was meaningful. That was important. And that's where that opportunity was for digital. Now, there are challenges to publishing in the digital age. One are these. The phone. We all have one. It's probably in your pocket, your purse, in your bag. Getting them to put this down because there's a billion apps they can go on and read a book is a challenge. But this is also the opportunity. I connected with millions of readers with this phone. I turned them into readers, the ones that had never picked up a book. So although this is a challenge with reduced attention spans and everyone wanting short-form content, it's also an opportunity. Another challenge is that everyone is online. Individuals, businesses, we are competing for attention. We want them to stop, to watch our video, to engage, than to have that call to action, which is, please read my book. But even though it's saturated, even though everyone's on there are ways that you can engage. And usually it's just hooking that reader. Those first few seconds. Tell them what the book is about. I mean, when I've done that with my other books since then, I've created readers then. The power of digital is that between my social media platforms, I have nearly 1 million followers. I will never meet 1 million people in my lifetime, but I can connect with them online. And that is truly powerful. There are pitfalls. You open yourself up to criticism. Things can run wild, like that first video I mentioned, where I pretended it was my real life. TikTok has an average watch time, and I saw the average watch time of that 30-second video was 27 seconds. And so some people didn't see that it was a book. And then they thought my husband was being accused of murdering his mistress. And I knew this because I started getting comments on some of the other videos that my husband was in. And they were like, wait, isn't he supposed to be in jail? That was a pitfall. The Daily Mail wrote an article about it. But it added to the story. It created it more outside of that book. It created a story for myself as an author. It allowed people to get to know me, who I am, my humor. They can pick it up in my books. They understand it now. So it created a connection not only to what I'm creating, but to who I am. So yes, there are challenges, but where there are challenges, there are opportunities. And you either have to find them or you have to create them yourself. But before you can do that, you have to tell your story. Because only you can tell your story. So go tell it. Thank you.